So
Okay.
I'm here with Sandra, right?
Hi.
Do you believe that animals should have rights, and what does it mean?
Yes, I believe animals should have rights, and I think it should be as close to what we think is natural for an animal as possible. For example, cows shouldn't be raised on concrete block nor in close contact with each other because they prefer more space and separation. So I think animal rights, it should just be what we think is healthy, normal. We can study behaviors of animals and figure out what is the best way to keep them. But I think that they should have rights. And to what degree? I don't know if we should have laws. I don't know if there are punishments if you don't give animals rights. But just like a child, they don't talk, so we have to protect them somehow.
Okay, but I wonder because we humans, we have tried a lot to escape nature.
Okay.
For example, it's a human right if you get injured to go to a doctor, right, to get healthcare, whereas the natural thing is not to do it. So
Yeah.
let's say, in that manner, should we have vets? If we find an animal injured by another animal,
Yeah. When I think about animal rights, I think about when humans are interacting with animals. Obviously, if two squirrels get in a fight in the forest and one gets injured, nobody needs to respond
okay,
because that's nature. But I think when it comes to animal rights, we're talking about when humans and animals world mix. So when we keep them as pets, when we keep them as food, when we keep them in zoos, like whenever humans are ruling over the animals, then they have to have rights. Yeah.
okay. And then do you think it's still ethical to use them for food?
I don't think it's ethical to use them for
Okay.
food. About 5 years ago, I chose to have a plant-based diet, so have a vegan diet. And so I think if there are other options, then we should avoid using animals as food. And I think there are plenty of options. I don't know. I guess I'm proud to say, like, I had a vegan pregnancy and I have a really
Okay.
healthy vegan baby, and she's 3 now, and she's in the 99 percentile of weight and height. And we take supplements, but otherwise, I don't think we have to eat animals. And I don't think we need them at all for food. And yeah, that's my answer to that question.
It's very impressive because you're friends with people who eat meat, let's say. So is that socially acceptable animal abuse, you would say? Or how would you describe eating meat? Why are you comfortable with talking someone who is comfortable with eating meat?
Yeah.
Versus if that person was a murderer of humans and not of animals, maybe you wouldn't want to hang out with that person.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think culture, there's a long history of using food for animals, and I think it doesn't flip overnight. And
Okay.
so my whole belief is that everyone should do what you can. So if you can, you should. But if you can't, for whatever reason, it's cultural or you think it's bad for your body or whatever, then don't do it. But if you can, you should. So if you really believe deep down that it's possible, then I think you have a responsibility, an ethical responsibility to eliminate harm wherever it comes from, you know. When it comes to animals, I don't make any exceptions for eating ethical meat or whatever, like that was raised cage free or any of that stuff. I think it's still suffering and I feel like I can eliminate it, so I just choose to be vegan. But if I meet somebody, like I have friends who eat meat, I don't feel like it's my like responsibility to judge them or say don't do that. It's more like everyone in this situation needs to come to it on their own, because if you're forced, it's not really for the right reasons. That's where I come from. Yeah.
Do you see animal rights as more gradual, like in a gradient, as opposed to human rights? For example, I assume you would agree that every human has the right not to be killed, right?
Yeah.
Whereas that right in animals, it depends on the species, it depends on the country, it depends on the cultural consensus, and you accept in practical manner this gradual transition because you seem to acknowledge that it doesn't make sense. What do you think about the animal activists that, let's say, go to a supermarket and scream, "You are all murderers and there's blood"? I don't have a clear opinion. Of course, my gut feeling is negative, but do you think animal rights are in a gradient and there is no other way to be? Or
It just makes me think of when I was in university, I took care of a pig. And these were all baby pigs. They were 6 months old, but they were huge already. And our job was to train them to walk in a straight line with a board that blinds what they can see and a
Okay.
little cane tapping on their bottom so that they go into the ramps when they become like enormous so that they can't be moved.
class with that?
It was like animal handling. It was a 1 credit class at university at Rutgers in New Jersey.
What did you study?
I studied biology, but I
Okay.
took it as a extra credit that I needed to complete my studies. In the end, we all loved our pigs and we wanted to save them. And we were trying to organize some sort of night operation to get them out and retire them onto like a farm sanctuary that was upstate New York. And when our professors somehow it leaked out that we were doing this, got really angry and said these animals were born and raised to be meat, and that's how this thing will end. And if you try to organize anything, you will all fail this course and we'll shut the whole thing down.
Wow.
So then for me, it was just this moment of, no, I don't want humans to die, obviously, but animals are brought here through humans and they're brought here for whatever purpose they're here. So if they're meant to be meat, then there's this feeling of until people stop buying meat, it's really hard to think of it as like murder because or like controlling an animal, or I don't know, it's hard to think of it that way because it's going to happen because that's how they were raised. They were born and raised to be here. No, I don't agree with it. That's why I don't buy it. But if someone's screaming murder in the shop, I would look at that and say, awesome.
But that professor of yours is so provocative because the moment a human bonds with an animal, the relationship, how to say, to harm the animal, you harm a human
Yeah.
at the same time. And then if your professor, let's say, had a dog, and maybe it's not a good example, would go to China and say, oh, we eat dogs here, so we just ate your dog. It's like,
Yeah.
no, it's more important. Right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't make any sense.
I can see where you're coming from in that sense, but you also have to think that dog is family somehow. And if someone takes your dog
Exactly.
and murders it and eats it, then that's different. But if your dog was in a dog farm, it wasn't your dog. It was just meant to be meat from the start. There's something, I don't know, there's a fine line. What are you going to do with all those animals then? You have to feed them and take care of them, and they live in terrible conditions. So in a way, it's almost murder is the best option, to keep them confined and do nothing with them so they die of disease. I don't know. I feel like if we could just end meat, then we would have to first eat whatever's left and then end it.
Okay.
Something like
Fair
that.
point.
I don't know.
Yeah. The question of how to transition, let's say, if you really want to switch to plant-based production, but you
Yeah.
are an animal farmer, this is very difficult. I understand this is not an argument because you could say, okay, we all use horses. What are we going to do with all these horses when cars come, for example? There always needs to be a transition, but the question is, do we want to do this transition?
I think so, actually. I think there's a really good sign that people care more, even when it comes to global warming, like how young people, I consider myself a young person, but even younger than me, they're very concerned about global warming. And there's a great movie, that Cowspiracy, that tells you want to end global warming, have a plant-based diet, because the amount of trees they cut down to harvest meat, they could just use that land to harvest plants and feed many more people.
Maybe a last question that I'm very interested in, because I don't know my opinion about it. If there is a very important cause, do you think it's an obligation of someone to be an activist or to be vocal about that cause? Because we see sometimes in the more progressive societies in the West that we say, for example, if you do not speak about it, even if you know it's there, you are part of the problem, you're part of the oppressor, you're part of the murderer.
Yeah.
And so do you think if somebody says, I live my life as peacefully as possible, I don't actively do anything socially unacceptable, and that's none of my business, and you guys do whatever you want, is that person off the hook? Or do you think they're complicit in something negative?
It makes me think of what I say sometimes if I'm with family or friends that eat meat, and they're like, oh, what can, and I was like, forget it, it's fine. I'm at your house, you invited me. I'm not vegan-angelical. I'm not preaching.
Vegan-angelical.
I'm not preaching this. And in this situation, I think anything with a strong movement towards change, you have to, I don't know, for me, the most peaceful way is just a quieter way. I think people really get turned off, especially in the sense of veganism, to go stand on the street corner and tell people they're murderers and go vegan and be really loud about it, because it is so cultural. And I don't know, I think for me, I feel like I'm voting with my dollars, or my euros since I'm in Europe. I just don't buy it. And when people come to my house, because we host a lot of volunteers from a website called Workaway, we tell them it's a vegan house. If you want eggs or dairy, either you buy it yourself or eat it out of the restaurant. And in that way, we're changing people because they come to our house and like, wow, this is great. You can eat vegan and it's not just pasta every day.
Okay.
I think a quieter way in this topic is much better.
Okay.
There are points where you have to be louder at different topics, but this topic, I think
But
it's quiet.
I want to understand if that's
Yeah.
your argument. So, if the most efficient way would be to shame people, you know what I mean? If that was more effective, because if it's not more effective, nobody's angry. You know, and
Yeah.
you can call out all the violent activist moves, but those people claim, and I have no idea if they're correct or not, that it's not enough. Your stance is not to be commended, but you should be an activist.
Yeah.
So if that was more effective, from a moral standpoint, where would you stand? It's a difficult question, I know.
I'm interested because I don't know if it's the answer to your question, but for example, there was a product at one of my favorite food stores and it had egg whites in it. And I wrote to them and I said, can you just reformulate this product and take the egg whites out? And then you'll make everybody happy, all the vegans happy.
But it
So-
wasn't claiming to be vegan, or
It wasn't, but it would have been perfect. It was the only ingredient that
Ah,
made
it
it
could
not
be like
vegan.
a-
It's almost vegan. Can you just take the egg whites out? And I have all the emails. And
Okay.
finally they took it out. But it was like 10 years later.
okay.
But they took it out, so whatever. From my experience, if you talk about veganism, people get angry because they feel guilty. They know, everybody knows that the meat industry is horrible. The dairy industry is horrible, the eggs industry is horrible. Everybody knows, but I don't know what it is why people don't want to change. It could be a factor of being too lazy or health reasons, or I don't know. When you talk about veganism, automatically people are like, I don't eat meat every day. I didn't even ask you how many times you eat meat. It's just a guilt-provoking thing. If you
Yeah.
say you're vegan, somebody's already ready to build up their defense about why they're not. And so I don't think activism in the loud form actually works. I think it really turns people off. I think the only way is to show them.
Because
you know?
they already have enough data to feel guilty in the first place. And personally, I eat meat, I like meat, and I agree with all your arguments. So to say that I live as ethically and as morally as I could, it's a lie. And I would be a hypocrite.
Yeah,
So I know I'm doing something negative, and I have an amount of guilt.
sure.
Now, how much this guilt should be, I think it's not useful to be debilitating. And if it could change me, maybe. But I have tried vegan diets also. I'm sure I could have done it a more efficient and functional way, or give
Yeah.
it more patience. But I'm not as interested or as socially pressured to get there. And I think convenience is useful. For example, things like chicken nuggets. Now everywhere, McDonald's, all the mainstream places, they have plant-based and normal. It tastes pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So I would say I'm not the right person to advocate for it because it's not the hill I would die on. But yeah, like I would agree with you, but I'm also not necessarily the most passionate person about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's
Wow,
fun.
that was so good.